Hey everybody, I'm Jason, and this is Jay's Project Garage. I don't know if you guys can hear that. We have a Great Pyrenees. Great, loving dog, loyal. Holy smoke, she just barks nonstop. I said something to my wife about it, and she's like, well, that's what they're bred for, to keep predators away. By barking? Figure the size of the dog would be intimidating enough. I don't know. So today's video is the famous Ford 5-liter HO better than the Boss 302? Am I insane? Hear me out. Is it a better engine? Did it do more? Yes. So let's go back. So 1960s, Ford's total performance era, win at all costs in every discipline. They threw insane amounts of money at every kind of racing you can think of, and they were extremely successful. Chrysler guys say, oh, the Chrysler Hemi, you can't touch them. They dominated in the 60s. That's not entirely true. I mean, look at how many wins they had, and look and see how many championships they won. I would say that Ford's FE and the Boss 429, if you look at total wins, were more dominant. But everyone can find facts that fit their, oh, what's the right word? Agenda. Whew, man, it's early. I'm still half asleep. GM can find facts to say that they were the best. Ford guys can find facts that say they're the best. Chrysler guys can find facts that say they're the best. I say, I like them all. I am a Ford guy, but I have a lot of respect for all of them. I say Ford was more dominant in the 60s. They won more races and more different series than any other manufacturer. 73 IndyCar wins, including 3 Indy 500s with a stock block, small block Ford. Land speed records, NHRA records, NASCAR records, FIA records. They won 24 Hours of Le Mans. They won Daytona, Sebring. They won all over the world. And back then, most of the stuff was production based. Way more than it is today. But we're here to talk about the Ford 5-liter HO and the Boss 302. So, Ford's total performance era. We all know that the Mustang came out in mid-64. We all know Carroll Shelby got involved and started racing the car. Found a lot of success with it after the success of his Cobra using Ford engines. Ford's going Trans Am racing. Fairly new series in the SCCA. 1966, Ford won. 1967, Ford won with the little Hypo 289 prepped by Shelby. The guy was a genius. Every brand has their icon or icons. Ford's no different. You get those guys that just speak the brand. John Kazi. He's a Ford god in my eyes. I mean, the guy's a genius. I mean, look at his Engine Masters Challenge record, and that'll tell you everything you need to know. So, we all know the Camaro came out in 1967. Ford barely won the championship in 67 for Trans Am. They knew that it was going to take more than their little 289 to compete with the small block Chevys and the Camaro for 1968. Ford had been playing around with a design called a tunnel port. And basically, it's a sewer pipe of an intake port with a pushrod tube going through the center of it. And here's a picture of one. So they decided to take that same basic design and apply it to the 302, and they were going to use it for the Trans Am series. And they were actually going to produce this engine and put it in Mustangs to homologate it. And basically what that means is you had to make so many of a certain model of car for it to legally compete in a certain series, which is why the Boss 302 engine was born, why the Boss 302 or Boss 429 was born, because they needed to homologate it for NASCAR. And there would have been a 427 Camry car, probably a Galaxy. We'll talk about that in another video, because there's a lot of myths and half-truths and stuff when it comes to that engine. I think it's Ford fanboys trying to beat their chest and say this is the best engine ever. So Ford throws this little tunnel port 302 together, and I think I've talked about it in another video. The whole reason Ford went from a 289 to 302 is because of SCCA and FIA rules changes, where they limited the cubic inches to 5 liter. So Ford, different crank, different rods, same pistons, grew it to a 302. That's the only reason the 302 ever existed, was to homologate it for a racing series. Otherwise, there would have been no point in adding 13 cubic inches. So we got the tunnel port. Ford builds this thing, and it is a screamer. I mean, it wants to be shifted at like 9,500 on parts from the 60s. Can you imagine that? They were using a lot of the stuff from the GT40 program, so it was better than production. We're still talking 9,000 RPMs in 1968 on a big old chunk of cast iron. So Ford designs this engine, thing makes no low end torque, it's a total screamer. They go out and they win the first race with it in Trans Am. They think, this is gonna be great. And then everything went to shit. The valve train could not handle that kind of RPM, and they tried everything. They had shaft mount stuff, and they tried everything, and they just kept blowing engines. It was a dismal failure. There are some guys that are using new technology, and they brought the tunnel port. They're still using them. There's guys that are running the vintage racing series that are running tunnel ports, and they're successful with them, and they're holding together. But boy, things have changed in the last 50 some odd years. So the tunnel port wasn't going to do it. And before the tunnel port, while the tunnel port was still in development, Ford was already designing the Boss 302 for the 1969 season. They took the heads from the what was going to be the new engine in 1970, the 351 Cleveland. They took those cylinder heads and they put them on the 302, and the Boss 302 was born. And in 1969, if you ask Bud Moore, the only thing that cost Ford the championship was the batteries that they were using. Ford insisted on them using these little lightweight batteries. They wouldn't hold a charge for the whole race. I don't remember the whole story. I'd have to go back and read it. But Ford didn't lose the championship in 69 by much. So Ford won the championship in 66, 67 with the 289. They lost it in 68 with the tunnel port. They almost won it in 69 with the Boss 302, and they did win it in 1970 with the Boss 302. Some guys will say it's one of the greatest engines Ford ever designed. Some guys will say that it didn't make any low-end torque and it made a horrible street engine. Some guys will talk about how great it is on the street. I have personally owned a Boss 302, but I have never owned a Boss 302 engine, and I've never driven one. I've heard them run, and I've seen them run, but I've never driven one. So I've never had that seat of the pants, what's this thing really like? And it was only available for 2 years, 69 and 70. They did make a 71 Boss 302. It was a prototype car, supposed to be crushed. Somehow it wound up in the hands of John Q. Public, and it still exists, and I think it's either being restored or has been restored. I mean, that's like the ultimate barn find. Can you imagine finding a one of one car like that? I've never been a huge fan of the 71-3 Mustangs. I think they just look really big. If you've ever driven one, they've got a blind spot that starts like here and goes all the way around you. But in my opinion, the best driving of any of the early Mustangs. They finally got it right in 71. I just wish the looks had gone along with everything else. I would still own one because I am a Mustang guy, but probably my least favorite. So that's that for that section. Here's a few pictures of the Tunnel Port 302 and the Boss 302. This is a comparison of the Tunnel Port versus a standard small block Ford intake port. And these are the Boss 302 cylinder heads, nose to screw-in studs and guide plates. 302 tunnel port installed in a car. And the race version of the Boss 302 with two Holley Dominator carburetors. And Ford's total performance era officially ended after the 1970 racing season. Insurance companies and the government pressure. If you have all this money to spend on racing, you should be spending it on better fuel economy and safety in your vehicles. Okay. No more racing for Ford. So in my opinion, any series or championships from that in 1971 with AMC or whatever, they're pretty hollow in my opinion. Because the era of massive factory backing and win at all costs had come to an end. So it was just, as far as Ford was concerned. The Boss 302 died after 1970. The 351 Cleveland officially died in 1973, and some wound up in 74 model year cars, but that was it. And like I talked about in the last video with the 351 Modified, it was born in 1975 to fill a void for that cubic inch that Ford wanted in certain models. We'll talk about the 351 Modified and the 400 in another video. It's just, it's a tall deck Cleveland. Same basic cylinder head, same design, same exhaust manifolds, oil pans interchange. I mean, different bell housing, different motor mounts, but we'll talk about that in another video. And then the 1970s happened. We had the oil embargo. Ford almost completely cut out. They did in 1974. There was no V8 available in the Mustang. It was a V6 or a 4-cylinder. I mean, it was like the whole world had come crashing down for the muscle car guys. I think Pontiac probably did the best job. GM in general probably did better than Ford did through the 70s with at least offering something. I mean, you could still get the Trans Am with the 400 Pontiac, and the Corvette still had the 350, the Camaro still had the 350. Granted, they were way down on power, but at least there was something there to work with. Personally, I think the 74 to 77 Mustang 2, or 78, sorry, 74 to 78 Mustang 2 was a great car. It was the perfect car at the perfect time. Ford sold the hell out of those things. Millions. Okay, maybe not millions, but they sold 1.1 million from 74 to 78. That's still a bunch of cars. And that's exactly what they needed, because by 73, the Mustang sales were way down. They needed to do something, or they were just going to kill off the brand. But things changed in 1978 when the Fox platform came out, and as the Fairmount. And in 1979 with the Fox Body Mustang. The first 3 years of the Fox Body Mustang weren't really anything to write home about. There was 2 years there where the only V8 available was a 255-inch. But then the 302 came back. And it came back as a 2-barrel, and they offered it as a 4-barrel. And in 1985, they offered it with a roller cam and better cylinder heads. And in 86, they kind of went off the rails just a little bit with a weird cylinder head and a completely flat piston. I don't know. Emissions, I mean, I don't know what the hell they were thinking. I mean, they tried that crap back in the 60s and it didn't work. Why'd they think it would work in 86? But 86, the GT was injected. I almost said tune port, long runner, multi-port, EFI. So I think 87 was probably when the 50HO officially arrived as what everybody knows. And that was available from 87 to 93. There's a lot of guys that say, oh, the Fox body Mustangs are ugly. They weren't at the time. At the time, they were, it's like, man, these cars are cool. They make some torque. They're super fun to drive. It was a really, really well-designed chassis that is still being used to this day. You cannot go to a drag strip anywhere in the country at any event and not see Fox body Mustangs there. It is probably the most supported chassis, aftermarket-wise, ever built. There's a million different suspension parts for them, transmissions, engine options. I mean, these guys are boogieing with cars that were built that were designed back in the 70s. So the 5-liter HO. Think about how many companies owe their existence to the Fox body Mustang. TrickFlow. TrickFlow started making cylinder heads for the Ford 5-liter. That was the first thing they ever offered, and look at where they're at now. BBK, Mack. Think about all the different suspension companies and everything. If it hadn't been, my opinion is, if it hadn't been for the Ford 5-liter Fox body, the aftermarket would not be where they are today. They were floundering. You know, they went fishing in the 70s and the early 80s. I mean, yeah, they were making stuff for the small block Chevy and they were making a few things for the Ford, but they were just kind of cruising along. And then the mid 1980s, the Mustang literally exploded. All these new companies were making parts. The companies, Edelbrock and AFR and all these other companies have been making stuff for Chevys with a few parts for Dodges and Fords. All of a sudden, their business exploded. We can make all this stuff. Edelbrock exploded. We got all these new intakes and everything we can make. There is no arguing the fact that the Fox body was a way better platform than GM's F body, the Camaros and the Firebirds. Better platform. The things that you could do with it. How versatile it was. I mean, they ran them road racing and drag racing and about everything you can think of. Guys are using these things for everything. The 5-liter didn't make that much, but I think at its high water mark, it was making 225 horsepower. And you look back on that now, where the Mustang's making 460 with the new 5-liter Coyote motor. And you're like, 225 horsepower? For the 1980s, that was really respectable. And if you drove one compared to what the other cars that you were subjected to, it's like, man, these things are a blast. They are a lot of fun. These things, they just feel like they make a lot of power. I think the Ford 5-liter HO did more for the industry as a whole, for the hobby, and to this day, the 5-liter is still being used. I mean, look up YouTube videos. They're all over the place. High mile short blocks with cylinder heads and intakes and stuff on them. These guys they're beating the hell out of them. But there's a metric ton of them still out there. I think I've got like 18 Ford 302s. Plenty to last me forever. And there's always more. I'm always coming up, like my last video where I drove and I paid $200 for 2 engines and I got 2 roller 5-liters, no problem. And I probably come up with 7 or 8 of them a year without even really looking. They're out there. Is the Ford 5-liter HO a better engine than the Boss 302? At its core, no. But in the big picture, absolutely. I think it did more for Ford guys, and I think it did more for the aftermarket industry, and it did more for the development of fuel injection and performance than any other car. Prove me wrong. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think. Have I lost my mind? No, I don't think so. That's going to do it for this video. I'm going to make another one working on the 69 and some other stuff around here. But in the meantime, like and subscribe. I got a lot of stuff coming on this channel, and you guys, you shouldn't miss it. But get out in the shop and work on your projects. You guys have a great day, and I'll probably see you tomorrow.